third webinar of the year. So really happy to be with all of you with a topic that is really dear and of my core of interest today. So I can see that we've got still people coming in currently. The list of attendees is still growing. We've got people from more than 10 countries already. So looks good. Great. I guess we have people from different parts of the world. Quite a lot from Europe this time. Certainly with topic interesting these days. But also, people from the other side of the world, from China, India, also joining the session. So, whenever you want, you can use the chat in order to ask some questions. If you want to interrupt me anytime, I will see all your questions popping up. I'll be very glad to get a little bit more in this kind of interactive mode. So let's gently start with the webinar. So I mean just a little bit of background. The terminology of ecosystem is something that's really fit to the current business context. So I typically, describe the evolution of purchasing as a 5-phase type of development over time. So there was a time where basically, the person that was handling purchasing in the world of entrepreneur was at the same time the person was the CEO, the inventor, the salesperson, but also, doing most of the purchase on the trade routes that existed at that time across the world. And there was no sort of trade barriers. So it was quite already a mondialized, globalized type of environment. Then from the 1870s, this is really the time where we see the birth of purchasing, because this is the birth of the large companies. This is a time where we've seen, the first globalization. This is a period where, for instance, you could buy a rifle Winchester all over the world. You could buy a sewing machine, a Singer sewing machine all over the world. This was standardized product, easy to service, easy to maintain. And what we were seeing is the big companies, especially in industry like a railroad, like a steel, was the challenge of getting to scale. So the birth of big companies, multi locations, and especially in the railroad, there was a lot of challenge in terms of handling all the materials that were useful in order to build and to maintain the railways. And in the US, you had some already some purchasing functions directly related to the chief purchasing officer, directly to the CEO. So for instance, in the California Railroad Company, and this was a function directly related to the CEO of the railway company. The first book that was written on the topic of purchasing was actually by someone working in this field, and that book is freely it's freely available on internet, and it's always quite interesting to look into it. We could share the link if you're interested. Then came 1914, First World War, and at that time most of the countries decided to close their border. They realized that industry was essential in terms of the development of the military capabilities, and they wanted to make sure that they would be able to develop within each country their abilities from the industrial perspective. So that's when we saw a real closing of the borders. At that time, the end of the first globalization, and this is really a period where we are moving to a national champion era. And this is a time where we see vertical integration. The dream of someone like Henry Ford at that time was to have in one place, the full manufacturing of the Ford T. The idea was to be able to source some raw materials, and he even, own some of the rubber plantation in order to make the tire. So it was really vertically integrated, but his dream was to have everything under one roof. It's never been the case for the 40, but this is just, like this idea that if we bring everything on one roof, manage through, time and motion studies, the assembly line, scientific management, everything would be, managed to a level of perfection. So at that time, when companies started to develop vertically, you could see some uh, purchasing functions becoming less important, going back to some very basic transaction activities, managing contracts for some of the raw materials, and planning, handling some of the supplies to the big factory. Over time, the trade barriers reopened little by little, but this was a slow process. And it's only, when we got close to the economic challenges in the 70s that there was really some decisions to reopen the border, which took us to a period that we know well, because this is still, in many industry, the way the paradigm we're working with, which is the globalization. At that time, companies started to compete in multiple countries to go global. In order to be able to invest in these different countries, they needed to, sell, outsource some of the basic activities. This was the time where we had this, we are focusing on the core, sticking to the knitting, and making sure that, what we're not the best at doing, we would be outsourcing. As globalization took place, quality, corporate social responsibility became more and more important. And from a purchasing standpoint, this was the time where the focus was very much on, managing your supplier base, reducing your number of suppliers, making sure that in front of you, you have a smaller number of players with, some capacity to talk to, big players, where consolidation would lead to standardization and, best price. Global sourcing as well, during this period was becoming important. And as the chain were becoming more complex through this outsourcing process, supply chain management came to the forefront, risk management, and of course, the need to reintegrate some activities across, and the topic of collaboration. And this is still, the kind of, software, the operating systems we all have in the mind today when we look at, the way our supply chain, value chain are working. And over time, we saw this process of slicing and dicing, the value chain. There were more and more players all along the world, and everybody was being pushed by other companies buying from them to become a sort of a commodity. And every company was trying to escape this commodity trap, and to harness some of the new technology coming up. That's why we saw the all the move with the the first internet revolution, but today with the Internet of Things, all the transformation around sustainability are now seen by companies as an opportunity to move out of the commodity trap, and to be able to provide access to new competitive advantages, creating new business models thanks to how all this data available across, and the ease of building relationship with companies nowadays, through all these communication means. We see all different business model coming up. From a purchasing point of view, because of the recent crisis, it's obvious still a matter of cost and cash. We still, carry some of the practice from, the fourth generation, but we also have to bring innovation into the picture, and we need to recombine a number of existing technology, existing capabilities from our existing supply chain with new capabilities coming from other industries. And the concept of ecosystem is really connected to these times of disruption. And this is really something that's popping up because in many ways what we see here is the move from having a classic value chain, supply chain, where you've got different players behind each other, delivering to each other, to this much more complex group of companies where you've got your company, but also some complementers, some value add resellers, the suppliers, startups coming into play, and sometimes you compete with you collaborate with your competitors. So we've got to see the world a bit differently. I mean, think like of a company like IBM. If you go back to the 50s, IBM was fully integrated. They were transforming, if you want, sand into some algorithm, taking all the steps from chemical transformation of sand to building some of the electronic components, assembling computers, putting some software on top, and selling that to companies. To now they're just one layer in a much broader ecosystem of players who are, working together in order to, transform sand into algorithms. So where we had like just one company being able to do everything, now we've got a constellation of organization and companies, doing this work. And if we had a very mechanistic perspective across, supply chain based on, the strengths of the relationship and, the power balance across, in this world of ecosystem, we need to have a much more organic. And this is why we use the word ecosystem here. It's because every member of the ecosystem face is depending from the face of the player. What we have today is ecosystem competing with ecosystem players competing with other ecosystems on the other side. So what does it mean in terms of the purchasing function? The world around us has gotten more complex. Sometimes we clearly see it. Sometimes it's a little bit more difficult. But one of the key elements is the access to innovation. Of course, if we want to, bring some further incremental innovation related to, cost, performance, or adding some features to, existing elements we were used to buy from the existing supplier, this is something we can do by, sharing some common values across players, by building relationship and some of the long-term collaboration. But sometimes, when we want to bring some more radical type of innovation into, the game, then, it might be needed to go to new suppliers. And, it might not be that there is a very long-term perspective, but maybe it can even be a one-off situation where, some of the players see the benefits of working together. I mean, recently, for instance, Airbus has been going to startups in order to get access to some devices, that are capable of tracking every piece of packaging all across their factories and very soon across their suppliers. And this technology, that supports the implementation of circularity, across the full value chain, is something that's supported by two startups. The existing supplier was not the right source of capability for this. So it was important to go outside of the box in a way in order to get access to these players. And we see this, more and more across every industry, across in many companies. And we've just released recently a report on how to partner with startup, for instance. more broadly, we're living in a time where everybody is needs to go and have access, to some of the to some new capabilities. This include, for instance, farming, where in order to improve the yield, to improve the quality, today more and more companies are using the Internet of Things, a number of sensors that enable you to monitor, analyze a lot of information coming from the field and the farms. So over the long term, it's possible to correlate that with other external source of data, and to build the best capability to improve the farming yield and other characteristics over time. If we look at also some rather traditional industry like construction, there is an increased interest in terms of 3D printing for modular construction. We are still far away from putting all this together, but this is really one of the area where a lot of companies are starting to experiment with new solutions in order to go further. And one of the EIPM Executive MBA students, alumni, has been putting together a digital platform for the construction industry recently, and is making some nice steps into the market to allow people working on construction sites to directly purchase everything they need through a really easy type of catalog, and do other types of activities along, like monitoring employees. So and financial aspects. So also, if you look at automotive, the future of automotive will be depending on accessing capabilities from the chemical industry, for instance, in order to improve the capability for energy storage. That will be the bottleneck into the overall development of energy storage solution. This will, chemistry, and that will be bringing some very specific development and contribution here. And if you're looking at telecoms or utility, you're looking at, your equipment, your assets, and their monitoring, their maintenance, the management of these. People are looking at drones and robots capable of doing a number of things on this type of asset. So as we see, it's no more like from inside. We are developing and designing every piece of information. It's not just like from existing supplier that we get access to innovation, but sometimes it is really by going much further into what we call here the ecosystem, in order to to bring a bit more elements into the picture. And of course, this is a place where purchasing can be part of the game, and as a real opportunity these days, to make a very strong contribution as the function that has clearly an eye on the market on the outside, and sees what's evolving, what's coming up, and what could be integrated into the future in responding to the business challenges and the internal pain points and the customer needs. So ecosystem of different companies across, as we've seen before, they need people to steer them. And this is about managing the evolution of the player. This is, managing the balance between competition, collaboration, and also finding ways of putting together some project and process in order to, to bring collaboration on innovation, co-innovation on the forefront. Let's let's have a little survey to get you all involved. Okay. So you should see now on your screen, some question related to creating value and accessing innovation. Are your company focusing on working with existing supplier, working with tier 3 supplier, new players and startup, and also, non-supply chain players, NGOs, universities, research centers. And you can choose more than one. Huh? It's not just there's only one choice. Huh? So you can have a few choice. And then don't forget, you need to click on send votes. Okay, so well, I see that quite a number of people have been connecting through phones, and they might not have the the full capacity to vote here. Okay, I still see things moving. Okay, still progressing. Still a limited number of you have been able to access apparently for the vote. So I will, close it, showing that, it's kind of going down from working with existing supplier, working with tier 3, and then half of you saying they're working with new players and startup. I mean, I could compare this to the to the data we had in the past. It was 3 years ago when we did a survey to 120 companies on that topic. We're focusing on their existing supplier, 83%, but in the future, they were thinking this would be less of a source of innovation. That tier 2, tier 3, 34% were focusing on these, and then 24% on startup new player, and the last point was on 11% on the non-supply chain players. Well, I guess this is still something we will be measuring again this year when we will have the new survey. We will do exactly the same survey, in 2017 that we did in 2013. So, we can compare the evolution over time. But very interesting to see that we're moving more and more into the direction of not just looking at the obvious, the usual suspect, but really looking beyond for sources of innovation. And this is a challenge for us within the purchasing context, because what we tend to do is to have a rather classic way of thinking, where we see ourselves at the center of everything. We would love everybody to depend on us, and none of the supplier to, on which we would be having any dependencies. So we at the top of the food chain and trying to capture value. But of course, as we've seen before, we're just one in the middle of a rather broad ecosystem. And the question is not the one about, purely getting out of any form of dependencies, but really trying to understand within an ecosystem who will be able to take, the lion's share of the profit within the ecosystem. And of course, depending of, the life cycle of, the business activities, it could be quite different. If you're starting something totally new, then you want to establish some collaboration within the ecosystem in order to work closely with clients, suppliers, and other players in order to come up with, the most effective and valuable solution, really creating the value and that can be further captured after. But at the same time, want to be careful of protecting ideas and not being in situation where, you would have someone that would be able to, catch this idea and and be able to develop it on the side. Huh? I always remember when there was the first mega screens and that were put together for stadium. One company, it was rather a big choice for the stadium to invest in these screens, and one company decided just to buy a number of them, 8 of them, to the first manufacturer of these screens, and from that starting to run them instead of selling them. So it was a classic case where an ecosystem player found an interesting way of changing the business model and going away with some of the profit that the manufacturer was expecting to make. Then when you get into the stage of expansion, and then the challenge is to make sure that the supplier can support the growth. And so if you are in some specific industries, like the industrial robot these days, I know there's people from that industry today with us, and their challenge is really to make sure that they can have access to some of the key suppliers who can brought some of the capacity that will support selling the product on the market. And the challenge is really from a competition point of view within the ecosystem to defeat imitation and to make sure that preventing that some of the people are, whether located in different places in the ecosystem, would be able just to replicate your success and challenge your success by bringing new solutions to the market. And then we have the maturity stage, and always that picture is limited because maturity can be lasting for much longer. And here we getting back into the classic work of procurement, which is to work to deliver a competitive offer, making sure that we can maintain the market share, but working with suppliers in order to get rid of some of the costs, improve the TCO, working on cost models and this type of things in order to move forward and bringing all the players into the ecosystem. And at the last stage, it is about bringing new ideas in order to bring the new innovation on board, but of course, to avoid some external disruption. Okay. You can hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, I think there was a very short, slight, break. So one of the key points is, to take it's not just about one-to-one relationship. It is about to look at the full picture in terms of the ecosystem and really to, have a view in terms of what position you want to have into this ecosystem. And so some consulting companies have put some of this picture together a few years ago. And I think it's always interesting. You can have a PNG type of a situation where you want to be driven by open innovation and being able to be the place where every player is bringing the innovation and managing an ecosystem of innovative companies, so new solutions could be put to the market. If you're Walmart, you're kind of the last player in the chain, so naturally you would play a key role into the ecosystem in terms of allowing access to the final user, to the final customer, but also kicking back information to the ecosystem. And one of the key elements that really brought success to Walmart was when they started to send back, sales information, customer information back to the suppliers, creating some form of addiction to the type of data that was provided by Walmart to the different products and brands and companies, that were delivering stuff through them. You have other, types of ecosystem. One that was, if you want, some of the getting into the direction of platforms and the American Express. This is not like a central player who's decided was purely in and on, but leveraging a lot of capabilities across the world in terms of offering different services in different location, through access to the cloud. And you even have some ecosystems where nobody is really running them. Huh? If you look at Silicon Valley or other types of clusters, well, actually, there's nobody steering fully the ecosystem. Maybe the closest person who you could be saying is steering the ecosystem, is the person opening the bar every evening, where every inventors, every you know uh, person working on new ideas is coming and showing their latest development, having some discussion. This was the case in the Silicon Valley. It's been documented. A lot of the exchange of information, a lot of the knowledge was passed through some of the evening session in one of the key bar of the Silicon Valley. And this is very much talked about these days, but the world ecosystem is also often associated, but it doesn't need just to be limited to that, to platforms. Huh? So platforms are the two-sided market. We all know the Apple iOS or the Android one, where basically Google or Apple are providing a marketplace where partners, players can bring their own apps to the market, and the users provide some of the feedback. And in itself, this is one of the unique position you can get into an ecosystem. You don't decide who's fully who is on it or not, but you offer the opportunity for players to be able to sell their service through your platforms, and then you're able to capture some of the profit from the transaction that are taking place on this. This is a world that's fully supported by the the technology underneath. Now I'm seeing that some questions are coming from Tamara about yes, is self-organized then an ecosystem or just open communication system? When you see the origin of the Silicon Valley, for instance, I mean very clearly, you had some of the you had some very open communication. But what's important here is, for me, open communication is like a situation where everybody can come in and walk away. What I would think is slightly different into the early stages of the Silicon Valley is, the future of all the players was depending on the move that everybody was making at the same time. The self-organization is not coming from a broad organization, but adjustments over time. And therefore there would be some step by step evolution. Very quickly in the Silicon Valley, you see some of the big companies who decided to put their own antennas into the, and they brought together with them some some knowledge, some perspective. So no one was coordinating everything, but there was this kind of adaptive mechanism that was taking place, across the ecosystem. And also it was largely documented, that the diversity of people coming from all over the world was playing a role in building all of these connections. And then, you pose the question, what ecosystem will look like now in 5 years. Well, I think there was there's probably still the view that this is something that's good for the some of the high-tech industry these days. But uh, for me, I think there is a growing realization, especially with two trends. I mean, three trends. The first one being the Internet of Things. which will make sure that there will be new sensors, new platforms, new applications, and new business model all along our value chain. So what we have as a value chain today will totally, be percolated, will be impacted by a lot of new, capabilities that will come into play. So in the next 5 years, we will see a lot of company. We will try to, keep their actual position. Everybody still have very often the dream of being at the center of the ecosystems. Other will see that, maybe by staying a complementer for some time, they'll be able, on the longer run to capture a lot of data that will be useful for them to you become potentially, a facilitator of service across the ecosystem. So what we'll see is different types of strategies coming together with this new technology coming up. And if we think in terms of the challenge associated with sustainability, especially the implementation of the circular economy. Here again, we will see some new technology supporting this, but different ways of operating across the players within the industry. And again, the third trend that I think will drive that will be the personalization. Every devices used by consumers, will move little by little towards some more advanced, personalization aspects. Whether if we think of medicine, if we think of food, if we think of, there will be more and more of that, and therefore, we'll probably say less and less of the, classic centrally managed ecosystems, and more of the, rather facilitated ecosystem through, platform that will allow anyone to have access to, multiple solutions at the same time. But I think it would be difficult really to make some very strong prediction. And after every waves of integration of new technology, what we see is a restructuring of the value chain, a restructuring of the industry, and potentially, at some point, there will be certainly some stabilization, and maybe we will be coming back to more classic value chain. I don't know, but we shouldn't be, we shouldn't be thinking that the ecosystem will be here and will remain forever. Potentially, we could be coming back to different modes of organization of industries, depending how technology is evolving and how the different players are able to, capture position over time. Okay. Oops. So I'm trying to. I have difficult. I can't change slide. Yeah. So very classically, whenever we were looking at, suppliers would be interested to understand to what extent the capabilities they can bring to us are unique, and what type of intellectual property was part of it. And depending of this, this would be somehow dictating, how much profit they could be capturing, how much profit we could be capturing. This would be the classic drivers of what anyone can make, out of an innovation, what anyone can make out of a business, was dictated by these two elements. If at the end of the day, you can go on the market anywhere to have access to something that's highly replicated and no IP is protecting it, then you can have access to the best price. We all know this. But today, the real battle is about controlling the industry architecture, trying to, find the right position into the broader architecture in order to be able to say who's going to be able to, make money out of the situation in the future, and to ensure that you can control who's, where the profits across the full industry will be going. I mean, very broad and classic example, and the future of the automotive industry. We could move into a situation where the service, people offering services as mobility as a service could be dominating the industry, and commoditizing the car manufacturer in many ways. Or we could see, some of the OEM taking back control of these activities and being able to make sure that they maintain their unique position into the ecosystem. So what we see here is somehow a battle of architectures, a battle of ecosystems, and it's important to have this broader perspective when we are looking at the evolution of industry these days, and when we're starting to work with new players. How do you keep the control of an industry? There's been quite a lot of research in this field over the past few years. The avoiding up standards, is the right way to go about it. Think of companies that were working on domotics, for instance. The management of buildings. A few years ago, everything was designed in-house by players like Honeywell or Schneider Electric or Somfy or others, and everything was somehow controlled. There were one face to the final user who could put together really the building they wanted to have with all the service integrated. And what has happened is a number of companies have been coming on the side and trying to push for their own solution. Have been evolving in different directions depending if you're a bank, if you're in retail, if you are an office or a factory. And what happened over time is, these companies who had these, they try to prevent open standards to happen, but the industry has been moving into this situation, and now they've got to combine at very early stages other companies into their offerings, building the right collaboration alliances to offer their solution. Assuming responsibility for the final product is also essential. If we hear these days a lot of automotive people saying OEM talking about safety, it's basically because they want to associate their role into the value chain as the one who's ensuring the overall safety of the product, and this will be a key element. If people see that, if consumers see that safety as a key challenge in the evolution of the automotive industry, they will continue to go to brands who are a synonym of safety on the market. If safety appears to be something easy to manage across autonomous vehicles in the future, then the value of these brands will start to go down. And that goes very much in the same direction with the overall customer needs and this type of element. Of course, also what's important is to keep control of as much as possible of the supplier network. But for the automotive, again, this is kind of a challenging time because new players are coming in, and the key question is are we collaborating, are we competing? I think there is too much perspective on competition and not enough collaboration at this stage. So really important to understand across what's going to drive the position of every player. We will be able to capture profit, and it's not just about getting to the best price. Very often getting to the best position within an industry that's in a flux is rather important. So I don't know if you're a company who's putting together the smart grids of implementing the smart grids of the future. This is really a decision for you to wait for the market to be able to mature some of the solution, or if you want to be able to work very early in order to influence some of the standards. And maybe if you are participating to the development of the standard solution of the future, you won't just be making money out of selling your own solutions to your customer, but by having being part of the ownership of standards that will be used all across, you could be making profit from anyone playing on it. So this is the kind of things I've seen increasingly be part of the thinking of people within the purchasing, not in every category, in every area, but this is the broader picture that I think is useful to have in mind. Okay, don't hesitate to share some of the question. Now I would like also to go in something a bit more concrete and practical in terms of what can we do at the level of a supplier segment, at the level of a business unit, a product, in order to understand the ecosystem and how we could be getting advantage by looking at the full ecosystem and not just at some of the players. Any question at that stage? All is good? So basically what I will be, advocating now is that we need to challenge our way of thinking about the market analysis. So typically, when we do a supplier market analysis, what we look at is vendors. What we want is a company, a supplier who's able to deliver something to us. Well, in fact, when we're looking at an ecosystem, what's really interesting is to understand capabilities. Where do we have capabilities that can be useful to us? So if you are manufacturing, if you are a company into the cheese business and you're wrapping aluminium around some cheese paste, for instance, well, it's really important that you have a clear picture, not just of who are potential suppliers, but what capabilities exist across all of the suppliers, your suppliers, potential new suppliers, in order to serve some of your activities. So first shift is to move from looking at suppliers and thinking in terms of what are the capabilities out there that could be useful for us to mobilize into the future. Very often when we do a market analysis, what we look at is the current bargaining power of the different player at the current time and what we can make out of it. What's really important when looking at the ecosystem is really to look into the future. What are the future development? What will happen? What will impact collaboration and competition across the ecosystem? It's not just about what's happening today, but what could be some of the coming evolution. Where do we see some of the technology becoming more and more accessible? Where do we see some of the business model gaining prevalence on the market? Where do we see some new ways of working that could be interesting ones to be brought to the picture? And when what we've seen over the past few years is all the development around additive manufacturing, and some of the people that were saying 5 years ago, well, for the power generator market, we won't be using so much some of these technology because it's not good enough now. Well, today, this has been coming into the picture. So if we just look at today, well, maybe it's not worth taking into the consideration some of these technology, but maybe in 4 or 5 years, they will be bringing a lot of added value. Market analysis, I think, to be fair, a lot of people within the purchasing functions are, completing one on an occasional basis, and very often, to justify some of their existing way of thinking. And what's really important, I think, is to be able to zoom in, zoom out on a regular basis over time, and not just leaving that to an occasional type of activity. As I mentioned before, what typically we do within our classic supply market analysis, we look at number 1, number 2, number 3 on the market, and trying to better understand how they compete against each other and how we could get access either to the best price out of the 3, or how we could get access to some form of innovation from one of them that could be willing to make the extra steps, because the other ones are maybe ahead of them, or they really want to work with you when they find you attractive. When we look at the broader ecosystem, it's really important not just to look at competition, but also who is collaborating, with whom into the in the market, and trying really to understand what type of collaboration will be needed into the future. I'll be sharing some example just after, but a lot of the products we use for cooking, for instance, you see more and more of these touchscreen, and absolutely essentials to have more and more of the people who are specialists of ergonomics, to be working with the designer and the manufacturer of these in order to have the full picture. Okay, and if this is classically the job of the buyer to do the ecosystem analysis, I think absolutely essential to look at this as a joint activity, to be done with people from marketing, R&D, and with other functions depending of the situation. Everyone who's got a view on what's happening outside, everyone who's got perspective on potential solutions and where there should be some collaboration supporting the business in the future, should be participating in doing some of the ecosystem analysis. So over time, I've developed a methodology in 6 steps in order to look at ecosystems. The first one is really to define the scope, list some of the key trends, identify some of the ecosystem players, then mapping the ecosystem in itself, analyzing the dynamics over time of the ecosystems, and from that, developing a portfolio of collaboration or potential collaboration as next steps. So defining the scope, and the idea is really to look at what's in, what's out of the ecosystem. I'll take a case where that was developed together with one of my executive MBA students in China, but we took a European example here in terms of the European market for the blender. We started to look at the scope, and the idea was to think in terms of blenders who could provide, who could offer robust design, high cooking performance, more like a decent price than high price ones, multifunction, and easy to clean. So we said we would be looking at the scope in terms of the ecosystem of players. So here this is centered around a very specific product and looking at all the players around it. Of course, if you have a very complex and dynamic ecosystem supporting your supply market, you can just look at your supply market and ecosystem. Then the second step is to look at trends. And here, using some very classic checklist in terms of customer, political, economical, social, technological, environmental, legal perspective, coming up with a list of trends. And the beauty of it is, as we list the trends that will be affecting the scope that we've identified, is we will start to pinpoint some of the important players that will be part of the ecosystem in the future. So for instance, when we look at the blender, we say, the European market is kind of, getting more mature, the growth potential is low, there's no major political trend that will be impacted, but we saw that from the economic organization, the organization of economic activities, omni-channel will be more and more important, and that there will be more combination of e-commerce, apps, social media, and we identified as a potential new player into the ecosystem the startups that are working on some of the connected technology that affect every touch point of the customer. On the social aspects, the importance of cooking and the role of TV program producers. On technology, we looked at all the dimension of and we just listed a few here just for the being able to share some of the ideas. So I mentioned the ergonomists, but also some of the tier 2 material supplier or people providing sensors were perceived as becoming important player for the future. Yeah. And classically, behind some of the legal aspects, you still find some standard bodies. So really looking into the trends allows you to understand who could be playing a role into the future, who could be an actor that you need to take into consideration when the business will be changing over time. And based on that, you can build a rather simple picture. You can put yourself and maybe some of your distribution customer on top of the ecosystem. And then you can add who are the existing and current value chain member. Typically, this is kind of simple because you just go and you can look at who are the main suppliers of your product and services here for the blender. And then you can start to list rising and new player. Influencers are, people who don't have any economic activities, but they can influence in terms of consumer behavior. They can influence in terms of, relationship across the player, or they can influence across the technology adoption. So basically, they could be a non-governmental organization or international bodies, standard offices, any kind of influencer who's not taking an active role from an economic standpoint and making a profit out of the ecosystem. So when we look at the case before, we put on top some of the some of the distribution aspects that were perceived as being really important into the ecosystem of SEB in the case. And then we looked at what we need to build the blender, so the glass jar, the designer, the housing material, motor supplier, and so on and so on. This is the classic supply chain. We extended it to some of the tier 2 in terms of electronics, for instance. And then the new players, being the ergonomist, the tier 2 material supplier, the nutritionist, and some of the startup coming into play. We identify them as being part of the part of the rising and the new players. So you need to make sure that you find the right granularity when you build these types of ecosystems. And of course, at the end, you had some of the influencers. That if you start to put names of every player, then this will be a bit maybe a bit challenging to make sense out of. But really to have the right balance. And the idea is to to gain this visibility in terms of current, future player across the ecosystem. We've built a series of checklists that can be used, to support that. So this is, some of the stuff that we provide to participants to some of our training, and you will have access to these slides. But there are just questions that can help you to prompt, new players, new ideas, and so here, for instance, on the right, who are the disruptors, who are the innovative players, who are the innovation brokers? It's a whole process of, asking questions, raising some hypotheses about, what the ecosystem looks like. Then analyzing the dynamic is really, looking at this competition collaboration aspect. So today, who compete with whom on what? Tomorrow, who will compete with whom on what? So if you are a company who's producing champagne, it's absolutely essential, these days to collaborate with some of the company who are designing and developing some of the new packaging, because innovation is not going to be, coming from what's inside the bottle, but certainly from, what's around the bottle. But in order to be ahead of the other, it might also be interesting to, look at what's happening on the next stage and seeing, some of the what some of the chemical companies are doing in terms of bringing new features, and some of the sensor company bringing new features. So today we might just be collaborating with, the existing packaging provider, but it could be interesting to open this tomorrow and to look at, other companies who could be playing a role into this collaboration afterwards. So yeah, that's really about this dynamic, having to understand not just for today, but for the future, the dynamics of collaboration, the dynamics of competition. So yeah, I've got a question. When is it that you are that you generally do the ecosystem mapping? In the case refer, is this part of the category strategy, or is this start a new product solution development? I think if you have, highly dynamic categories, this is something that you actually can do as part of your category strategy. But what I think is important whenever you do that as part of your category strategy is maybe to broaden a little bit the perspective, because well, let me take the example. If you're looking at buying manufacturing equipment, for instance, and you're thinking about what could be, some of the capabilities you could be using into the future in order to put together a smart factory. Well, this will be tapping into also not just the provider of the equipment, but also some of the IT services, some of the maintenance service that exists today. So whenever you do a category strategy, it's indeed interesting to look at the ecosystem if you have something changing fast, dynamic. And if the demands internally is strong, to look at new solutions. But then you shouldn't constrain yourself with the current boundaries and the current silos of the different categories. So allow yourself to look at a broader picture, maybe, invite some other category managers to look at it. Also, of course, if you get involved in some of the company longer term thinking in terms of innovation teams, future product, this is the right time. The start of new product development, when you've defined your existing concept, could be a bit late in order to map the ecosystem. So I think it'd be important to have that even before you start a project, in order to get a sense of what could be future player you could start to test on future project, for instance. So I hope that this is answering your point. Okay. And a last element is, if you try to do this to a very, 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 very small segment, you won't get too much out of it. And if you take something that's much too broad, that would be the same. So it might take a little bit of experimentation in order to understand what is the best type of a scope you need to look at. And you can go back and forth as you look at the trends. You might realize that you need to broaden the scope. In the case of the blender, we started to look at the blender, but then suddenly we realized that it was important to just take into consideration the European market and not to look at the full global market, because consumer behaviors, trends, market evolutions were going to be different in one area of the world compared to the other. So let me show you what we got out of this in the case of SEB. So we said, well, today the different brand of blenders are competing. Tomorrow, you have the traditional players in this field. They could be competing with some of the startups that are currently buying in some countries a ready-made equipment and then connecting them to their system. Today you have suppliers of a full blender, without any brand. They can deliver something to you, and we've seen already some companies popping up on the market, trying to sell their solutions directly through online services and adding value to some of the connected devices. In terms of collaboration today, SEB was already working with glass jar supplier and designer in order to have the right product here. What they were saying is, what's important as well is also to involve some nutritionists into the future, because the shape of the jar was potentially also important in terms of breaking and revealing all of the valuable element of nutrition that would be inside it. And today, they had been working with the provider of the electronic solutions and some of the component supplier, and some of the idea would be to that in the future collaboration will also take place with these players, but also with some of the connected technology startups. So again, this is a rather pedagogical example that was developed, and not all the information was shared here, but this is really to give a sense. Again, we share with you today some of the checklists. You will have access to that in terms of how to ask the right question, you know, uh, who will own critical IP, critical competence, critical reputation, um, which of the players currently have similar or opposing agenda is an interesting question. Common interest, opposed interest, where data will be owned into the future, and what could be the role of data. All of these kind of questions can be, useful whenever you look at an ecosystem. And then the last stage is really to build your own strategy out of this, a portfolio of collaboration. And there will be some activities you will be monitoring. So continue to monitor, some of the players, but I would say capabilities. That's what I described at the start. Also, maybe having some experimentation with some players, some early involvement. So trying things out, see what's coming out of it, and seeing if there's benefits of going further, but also developing some, stronger collaboration immediately with some of the players. So in the case of SEB, because I didn't, provide the last slide, what they decided to do is, to continue to keep an eye on some of the evolution of the standard, and what would be the consumer behavior as well. They saw that it would be important not to have just one-to-one collaboration. So when they looked at, for instance, relationship with the designer, the glass jar supplier, they tended to have one-to-one exchange, and they said it could be interesting to, create some form of workshop where they could be putting together all of the player in one room to have some exchange and some discussion. So not being the one who's, just like managing every interaction, but supporting the development of interaction across the players within the ecosystem. The idea being that sometimes, knowledge can flow better if you have all the players together. And also they want to put some form of a project where they would be bringing all of these players together in order to move into the future solutions. So another element I would like to conclude with is this is all about capability. This is all about business and organization outside. But one thing that's really important is as you develop a vision on your business ecosystem, on the external ecosystem that can support, the transformation of your company, then it can be really interesting to also understand, the people side of things, and to make sure that, the people who can make things happen, the people who can drive the transformation are on board. So as we look at, the scope and the trend, it's really important on the top to, look at the business ecosystem, but at the same time to map the human ecosystem that will be supporting the business ecosystem. And all this can lead to some scenarios, business model that can be, tested and implemented, and, giving feedback in terms of both the business ecosystem, the human ecosystem, and somehow the scope and the trends. What I would recommend you is, just to also keep an eye, and there's very often we have a view of who's part of our category teams. So they would classically be, if we look at the ecosystem supporting a category, at existing team members, listing their name, but also their pain point. We're so used to go to people and ask them what they want, what they like. We should be more strong in terms of understanding, what do they fear, what prevents them to sleep at night, what they really don't want to see happening, what are their constraints, but also what are their vision of the future. This is very often what helps us to understand, how the human ecosystem is evolving, how relationship across people are, evolving. And as we find new player outside, we need to bring also together, new team members, new human ecosystem team members, and always trying to understand, who they are, what are their pain points, what are their constraints, what are their vision of the future. It's not just the internal one, it's about the full picture. So for me, the human ecosystem is not just people from your company, but making sure that you understand, also within the players outside, who they are, what are their pain points, what their constraint, what their vision of the future. because this is how that you will understand if the interest, the agenda will be compatible or will be, going to some challenges, and you'll be able to steer things in the right direction. And the challenge is to build the right human network that will support the right, company network ecosystem for the future. Let me, conclude now with a few points, and after, feel free to ask some of the questions. The first element is we need to challenge our mental models. We tend to get stuck into, we'll keep doing the same things forever. So we need to really put our head into the trend that will define the success of tomorrow. I always remember a number of years ago, a famous company that was making a mobile phone, and I was visiting there about to have to participate and give my views on the discussion about measuring innovation, and one of the person in the company said to me, but Hervé, the iPhone will just be a toy for the rich people, and we need to challenge our ways of thinking. We need to look at the trend that will transform, the companies, the competitive arenas, and the ecosystems, and we need to take them seriously, at least, in our mind today, so we could be ready, to change our direction if needed. We'll have to be clear that collaboration will become more and more key to success. And I think it's not the same as the past. Over the past few years, we were talking a lot about the importance of building long-term collaboration with some players. Tomorrow, yes, there will be the need to have long-term collaboration with some players into the ecosystem, but the ability to build quickly some new collaboration, integrating them for a certain amount of time, and sometime, potentially releasing them. Maybe you just want to have access to some, new technology developed in a totally different sector, and therefore you will be, developing connections with these players, but then putting them in touch with, some of your suppliers. We don't always need long-term collaboration in a fast-changing world, but collaboration will be essential to make things work. More and more also, we need to look at the world not as a very ordered one, and accept the fact that maybe some of the ecosystem players outside, they can be at the same time a client, a competitor, or a partner. You see that very often in some industries, like chemical or aerospace, but this will be more and more the case. And yes, of course, sometimes we need to find a way of getting around these and building a different ecosystem. But sometimes we also need to accept some of these challenges, because there can be some value of working with these types of players. Another element, we're very much used to the idea that we need to manage relationship on a one-to-one basis. So it's we need to be two to tango, but in the future we'll potentially, in a number of cases, need to be more than two to tango. It was some of the conclusion from what we've seen before with the SEB case, that from time to time you need to bring more players at the same table, so we can have a broader perspective on what's possible, what's not possible, and how this could be done. And from that, maybe going back to more classic types of relationship, but the broader perspective. The smart cities of the future, they won't be built by having the town hall of the city having one-to-one conversation with utility company, telecom company, and some of the other players. This will be coming from a lot of these players working together across sectors, across industries. I think that's something that we really need to have in mind. And all of this will call for more anticipation. I still hear a lot of people saying, well, I want to be clear about what my business partner needs. Well, no, we need to anticipate that, because new solutions are coming up. We need to understand not just what they want as a specification, but we need to understand what are their pain points, what are their dreams, what are their constraints, in order to be able to put them in front of potential solution when we see them in the market, for instance. So anticipation is essential. Entrepreneurship, we need to be able to move out of the classic ways of working and from time to time, work fast and have this kind of experimentation attitude, bring players, get to some decisions. It's not about pushing a solution, it's about testing hypothesis. So that's a totally different set of mindset. Too often we know, and then we push for what we know. No, I think in this new world coming, in these different ecosystems, everything is an hypothesis, and every hypothesis is worth being, tested if the players agree on the value of having a go at it. So more and more, we need to go outside of the comfort zone and test new ideas quickly, fail quickly, and then, push for interesting development afterwards. And simplicity, collaboration across multiple players in this dynamic environment. We need to find ways of having, simple, direct, very open ways of exchanging. And this require not just negotiation skills, but this also require, some facilitation skills. They don't always need to come from, the purchasing teams. We have in companies people who are innovation teams. They have a lot of techniques for facilitating, design thinking activities and other ways of working together with other players. So built on the strengths we have across the company, built on the different capabilities. Our role is to, contribute to describing, mobilizing, bringing together the ecosystem. It doesn't mean we need to do everything, and we can use some other players to support with, for instance, the facilitation of some of the sessions. So again, I think for me the picture is the world is changing. We don't have classic chains in front of us. We've got more complex ecosystems that are co-evolving, where players are co-evolving over time. We need to be able to look at individual players from time to time, but sometimes look at the bigger picture. Map our ecosystems, try to understand what are the options coming out of it, and then running into some validation loops in order to see where we have some benefits for the future, where we should be further waiting, and where we could be moving into stronger partnership. Any question from all of you? We are, just about 10 minutes from the end of the session, so happy to take some questions from some of you. Yeah, I have a question related to some, is this logic also applicable in some of the indirect type of categories? Of course, huh? I think what we see today is a lot of organizations are still very much structured around some very specific segment, but if you think of car rentals, fleet management, taxi, travel, there's certainly some benefits to take a view of a much broader ecosystem perspective, even on these types of activities. And I've got one of my executive MBA students in Belgium who's done exactly that, and has been putting together a sort of cafeteria plan where people, they just get a car, they get a number of points they can use on different types of mobility solutions. So this was really an ecosystem way of thinking, about people coming to work. Any last questions? Any comments? Any point? So if I don't see any further questions, we will be sharing the presentation, and we can also distribute an article I've been writing recently in the European Business Review. So you've got a bit more perspective on it. Go practice, experiment with these different ways of thinking. I think it's full of promise and benefits. It's rather easy to start to put a few posters on the wall and to start to get people involved who are passing by and thinking about ecosystems. have a goal, be entrepreneurs, be you know, forward thinkers, and all the best to all of you. You know, and let's stay in touch if you got more questions into the future.